everyone. Thank you, as always, for joining these meetings. I'm particularly excited about this meeting and how many people are here today because so many of you had a hand in supporting the work that was done by Pivotal Research. So as you all know, the work that's being done for TFWs in the Prairie region lately is unprecedented, and there was a lot that wasn't known. And this is part of what Pivotal Research has been working on, is to increase the knowledge that we all have about where the project sits much more broadly in terms of the broader systems that we all interact with on behalf of our TFWs, and also understanding more why the circumstances that we find ourselves in are this way. So I'm not going to take time away from them, but I wanted to thank all of you for coming today. And I particularly wanted to thank Doha and Ksenia for their hard work and for sharing with us all that they have learned and have done for us. So thank you, and looking forward to the session.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jocelyn and team and everyone who's attending. Ksenia, I don't know if you want to put up the slides, but as Jocelyn has mentioned, the Alberta Association of Immigrant Serving Agencies and the Calgary Catholic Immigration Society jointly commissioned Pivotal Research to conduct policy research focused on temporary foreign workers in the Prairie provinces, building on the TFW Prairie Region project to provide ASA and CCIS with insights and opportunities to strengthen the TFW serving ecosystem across the Prairie region. Next slide. So a little bit of context here. In 2020, the TFW Prairie Region project was kickstarted as a partnership of 9 immigrant serving agencies and umbrella organizations in Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. This project was tasked with guiding and providing coordinated service delivery approach and assistance for TFWs and migrant workers, particularly those employed in the agricultural sector who have been impacted by the global COVID-19 pandemic. This partnership was led by CCIS and funded by Employment and Social Development Canada through CCIS, and the partnership was later expanded to encompass 14 project partners subcontracted by CCIS. Next slide. The TFW Prairie Region project continues to meet urgent and emerging needs of TFWs while facing multiple policy funding and service delivery challenges at various levels of the TFW serving ecosystem. And so CCIS and ASA are interested in increasing the capacity of the TFW Prairie Region project partners to execute informed service delivery, advocacy, policy development, and research to strengthen that ecosystem in the Prairie region and sustain critical project elements beyond the funding life cycle. And so some of the objectives that we set out to do is to conduct a review of research literature, to understand research gaps, and further strengthen the current TFW knowledge bank in the Prairie provinces. We set out to analyze the TFW Prairie Region project, not from an evaluative lens, but looking at the data to identify emerging trends and unmet needs, mapping and visualizing the location of TFWs across the Prairie provinces to understand service delivery, geographic reach, and identify policy advocacy funding and service delivery gaps and opportunities to address current needs of TFWs in the Prairie region. In terms of our research methodology, it was a multi-pronged approach. It ranged from conducting literature reviews and legislative analysis to organizing, analyzing, and mapping service delivery findings and data gathered from the TFW Prairie Region project and other sources. So for the literature review, we looked at literature specifically focused on the Prairie provinces between October and November 2021, encompassing 37 research references, looking at research that has been done between 2018 and 2021. So in the last 3 years, that was the focus. We also analyzed legislatively the similarities, differences, and unique aspects of Prairie Region TFW-related provincial policies and legislation. And we produced side-by-side analyses. We also looked at data from the TFW Prairie project, because there's been a lot of data that was collected. It was client data, also information that that came from the project partners about the service delivery experience. We also conducted stakeholder engagement by engaging project partnership through 2 workshops to help in solution generation, and also to react to some of the results that we were putting forth. So it was a very collaborative process. And we looked at various data sources, including to assist with geographic mapping. We accessed publicly available data on employers with approved labor market impact assessments, LMIAs, in the Prairie region. And so what some of the, just going back a little bit, Ksenia, I wanted to say some of the outputs from our work informed the development of several visuals. We created an ideal and a reimagined TFW serving ecosystem in the Prairie region model. And we also created an ideal TFW journey map in the Prairie region as well. So we really wanted to not only create a report, but also create some visuals that are high impact. Thank you. So a little bit here to give you a glimpse of the literature review that we did and the legislative analysis that we've conducted. We start with the federal policy and the history of the TFW program. The TFW program has a long-standing history dating back to 1966 under the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program, SAW, when Canada signed an agreement with Jamaica under which migrant workers would be employed on Canadian farms to fill labor shortages. In 1973, the program then expanded to meet the needs of Canadian employers for highly skilled workers, specifically in specialized medical and scientific fields. Then at the turn of the century in 2002, the program further expanded its scope to meet labor demand for foreign low-skilled workers. And then this was followed in 2008 with the addition of service and hospitality sector jobs into the low-skilled worker streams. And since then, the program really went through overwhelming growth. Wanted to talk a little bit about some of the reforms that the program has underwent. In the past decade, the program undergone several rounds of reforms with significant regulatory and policy amendments made in 2011, 2014, 2019, and then in 2020. In 2011, federal regulations were introduced to ban non-compliant employers from the temporary foreign worker program who fail to ensure the fulfillment of the conditions of the offer letter and the LMIA for a period of 2 years. And there's also a 4-year cumulative duration limit on TFW stay in Canada. It's called, as everyone would know it, the 4-in, 4-out rule. In 2014, the program saw another overhaul. The program was split into 2 programs, the Temporary Foreign Worker Program and the International Mobility Program. And the main difference is that in contrast to the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, the IMP does not require an LMIA process. Another of those changes in 2014 was putting Canadians first. So the cost of the LMIA application must be paid by the employer increased to $1,000. From $275. The LMI process also included more labor market verification. It also, there was a cap of 10% on the number of TFWs employed by a business. It was, so that cap was established as well. And then the duration of the LMIA was limited to 1 year, which meant that employers needed to reapply every year for TFWs to continue working for them legally. In 2019, Some of the most awaited change heavily lobbied for by nonprofit organizations came during that year with the introduction of the open work permit for vulnerable workers. Next slide. So a little bit about the recent program changes and proposed reforms that started to take place in 2020 through 2021. The program underwent several changes in response to the global COVID-19 pandemic. Some of those reforms are TFWs looking to change jobs and waiting on IRCC for work application approval were able to lawfully work. Some categories of undocumented TFWs were able to restore their legal status in the country, and some categories of visitors were able to apply for a work permit while remaining within the country. There were other changes as well in COVID-19 during that time, where the federal government deemed certain occupations as essential, and they really impacted some policies around temporary foreign workers, and those jobs were in the agricultural, healthcare, sanitation, logistics sectors. Other program enhancement include featuring a job bank, facilitating TFW search for jobs from employers who are eligible to recruit foreign workers, and also an enhanced TFW tip line was launched in March 2021. In terms of regulatory reforms or amendments that were introduced, have not been finalized yet, as we got the report out earlier this year, was requiring employers to equip TFWs with information about their rights, enhancing the TFW complaint process by prohibiting employer reprisals, requiring employers to provide TFWs with access to healthcare and extending health insurance coverage to them, prohibiting employers and recruitment consultants from charging recruitment fees to TFWs, deferring the LMIA processing for non-compliant employers, and facilitating the process of inspections and reducing inspection timelines through third-party coordination. As the program stands right now, it has several streams, as you can see here on the slides: high wage, low wage, primary agricultural stream, a global talent stream, a stream for hiring foreign academics, and the live-in caregiver program. Okay. So we talked a little bit about the federal policy, wanted to hone in a little bit on the provincial policy and legislation. In terms of the three prairie provinces that we're looking at, in 2020, as a result of the COVID economic recession, Alberta was the only prairie province that set a limit on the number and types of jobs that employers can hire through the temporary foreign worker program. That monitoring continues to take place, on a quarterly basis, so that limitation has not been lifted. The other two prairie provinces I mentioned did not, introduce any similar restrictive program policies at the provincial level. In terms of provincial legislation, the most significant difference between the Prairie region provinces is the range of legislation governing TFW-related worker standards. What we see is Alberta has no specific TFW-focused legislation. What Alberta relies on for protections and for regulation, of foreign worker recruitment and foreign workers is through existing legislation that touches on workers in general. In contrast, here we see Manitoba has a specific legislation for TFWs. It's called the Worker Recruitment and Protection Act, RAPA. It was created in 2009. It's specifically geared towards protection of foreign workers from recruiters and employers, and protection of children from talent modeling agencies. And when it was signed, RAPA was branded the Manitoba model, including progressive elements regarding worker protection, employer oversight, and worker recruitment requirements. And then you see in Saskatchewan, the Foreign Worker Recruitment Immigration Services Act, that also is a TFW specific legislation introduced in 2013, and provides protection to TFWs in addition to students, visitors, and other immigration categories. This legislation has been praised by advocacy organizations as the most comprehensive legislation that addresses common rights abuses of migrant workers. And here, I just wanted to give you a glimpse. I know, there's a lot to cover, but I just wanted to give you a glimpse that provincial legislation on TFWs varies, and the differences are evident from the definition of recruiter, employer, foreign worker, to licensing requirements and prohibitions and penalties across the Prairie provinces. Okay, next slide. I wanted to talk to you here about the TFW services at the federal level, provincial and municipal, and the ranges across the provinces, the Prairie provinces. I wanted to say first that budget 2021 at the federal level had dedicated investments for temporary foreign workers, and it proposed a $49.5 million migrant worker support program funded over a 3-year period in program and services directed at TFWs, and it includes arrival services and emergency at-risk situation assistance. And program funding would flow to service provider organizations and other community-based organizations to increase their capacity to deliver these services. And in tandem with creating a dedicated stream for TFW service delivery, the federal government also proposes $54.9 million to enhance employer inspections and enforcement of temporary foreign worker working conditions and wages, and then $35 million for an emergency on-farm support fund that would shore up agriculture employers' capacity to upgrade and improve housing they typically provide for migrant and seasonal farm workers. However, there continues to be gaps. So even with this funding, historically, federal funding does not really target migrant workers or temporary foreign workers. And so here comes the role of provincial funding, and it's really meant to complement federal funding to bridge the gap for clients who are ineligible for federally funded settlement integration services. However, since each province defines the amount of funding, services, and client eligibility differently, certain newcomer categories like temporary foreign workers remain underserved. As we look across the Prairie provinces, we see that Alberta adopts a more systematic approach to providing information consultation services to temporary foreign workers, while Saskatchewan provides provincially funded newcomer settlement services that broadly define eligibility. So that can include temporary foreign workers being able to receive some of those services. Provision of information in multiple languages remains a gap in all provinces, but more so in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Alberta has established some good practices by offering a toll-free telephone line, advisory offices specific to temporary foreign workers in Calgary and Edmonton. However, for integration services, provincial funding tends to focus more on the settlement and less on integration of newcomers.
So just to add to what Doha mentioned, we see that there are significant differences across all the provinces. So while Alberta may be providing actively the consultations through the advisory offices, and Saskatchewan and Manitoba don't, but at the same time, Alberta definitely lags behind the legislation in Saskatchewan and Manitoba because it doesn't have a legislation that would be specifically geared to TFWs, that would specifically consider their unique circumstances and the problems that we mentioned, like recruitment challenges, charging exorbitant recruitment fees, and things like that. So it's not exactly consistent across the provinces.
Thank you, correct. And just wanted to add one note about, as this trickles down to municipalities, municipal governments primarily rely on provincial funding to meet critical needs of their temporary residents and newcomers. However, there's not necessarily dedicated provincial investments for integration and settlement of temporary foreign workers. And so service provider organizations, grassroots community organizations, face a moral dilemma and sometimes do a lot of this work at the side of their desks. Okay, and I think what I want to do is hand it now to Ksenia. She will talk a little bit about the TFW experience from our literature, and then the TFW and service delivery experience from the Prairie project data analysis that we've conducted.
Thank you, Doha. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Ksenia. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a research analyst at Pivotal Research, and I'm going to talk a bit more on the TFW experience. So first of all, I would like to focus on the pre-arrival and recruitment experience. As we already mentioned, there are lots of challenges connected to recruitment. First of all, probably one of the biggest challenges of the program is that recruiters or so-called immigration consultants, many of them operate from source countries. So that means they're outside of Canadian jurisdiction and cannot be effectively regulated. There is almost nothing that Canadian government can do to actually prevent them from abusing TFWs, from taking advantage of TFWs while they are still back home. Secondly, as we already mentioned, employers are responsible to pay LMIA fees, which are right now at $1,000. But even though the government actually changed the price from $275 to $1,000, that in many cases did not kind of alleviate the burden that was on TFWs, because some of the qualitative research that we scanned that actually interviewed temporary foreign workers, it found that in many cases, somehow some unscrupulous employers, they find a way to actually charge TFWs or to somehow take that amount of money from their salaries so that they don't have to spend that much on hiring. So TFWs can be taken advantage of in this kind of way as well. The same qualitative research also finds that these recruitment fees can go as high as $10,000, $25,000, making TFWs take loans, sell their businesses back home, and kind of come to Canada thinking that they would be able to compensate, to recover that amount of money quickly, which is simply not true. And their limited language skills, unfortunately, prevent them from getting informed about all these problems and to actually making informed decisions. So it ends up that they are, TFWs, they end up being very vulnerable, and many of them also pour their life savings into this opportunity to just come to Canada, work there. And even more so because unlicensed recruiters were found to present this program as an easy immigration pathway, which is the way that this program is being sold. And unfortunately, TFWs think that they will be, that it would be easy to get a PR once they're here, but we know that that's not the way it is. Speaking more on the program and employment experience, we already mentioned that the settlement experience, that there is not enough dedicated temporary foreign worker services and the temporary resident services focused on integration and settlement, which is why TFWs become very dependent on the employers and the communities for this. And this is even a more acute issue for those agricultural workers who work in rural and remote areas where communities are small. So they have very limited resources to provide any sort of support. Secondly, I want to speak a bit more on the employer and TFW inherent power imbalance. As we mentioned, because of all those things, employers, they are just inherently in a position that they could potentially take advantage of TFWs if TFWs do not have enough knowledge on their rights. So TFWs end up being highly disposable. They fear that their employers will take an action in reprisal if they were to complain against them, and they fear that that will impact their opportunity to apply for the PR status. We also saw that through the literature review, we saw that some TFWs may have continued working through the COVID lockdowns. We understand that there may be a lot of the health and safety violations. And also what's important to mention is that there is reluctance to seek to access healthcare services by TFWs, again, because they fear they might be considered as inadmissible for the PR because their health is not the best. Similarly, they do not many TFWs at all have knowledge on how to file a compensation claim or how to file a health insurance claim, just in general, how the health insurance works in Canada. And we also mention here housing challenges, which include limited quality housing choice, which is again such an acute problem, as we heard during the focus groups, in particular in some rural areas, which simply do not have housing choices for rent. And also uncertainty and confusion with such frequent policy changes that TFWs without knowledge of English, without knowledge how things in Canada work, it may be very hard for them to navigate and stay up to date on all the recent changes. Speaking about post-program experience, what can happen to TFWs after the program is whether they return home or they stay in Canada. But as we know, staying in Canada is not that easy. There are several options that we're considering. They could wait on their sponsoring employers to renew their work permit or extend their employment, which is once again is the root of many of the problems, because they are very dependent on their employers in making these sort of decisions. Or they could choose to move to another employer who actually needs to already have an improved LMIA, or be willing to apply for LMIA, so to pay $1,000 fee and to go through all the bureaucratic procedures, which is tedious, time-consuming, resource-consuming. Not all employers are ready to do that. And then they could also make a choice, some sort of choice, to have their work permit or temporary resident visa expire, which in Canada, it would be called that they're staying undocumented, which puts them in a very vulnerable situation when they are not likely to access services again, just because they are afraid of how that might impact their status. And that brings a lot of problems. Or they can try to seek permanent residency pathways, but again, that largely depends on each province's labor needs. We know it's not as easy as immigration consultants make them believe it is. And we also know from literature that it may be the hardest for those agricultural workers, when only 2% of agricultural workers get PR. Now I want to focus a bit more on the TFW Prairie project itself and how it helped address all those gaps, lack of knowledge, lack of information for TFWs. This sample data visual that you see on the slide was part of the larger dashboard report that Pivotal Research has submitted to ASA and CCIS as a standalone deliverable. We analyzed the data from the project from January 4th to December 2nd. And some of the key highlights here is that you see that on the left, around 30% of the TFWs speak Tagalog, and around 30% speak Spanish. So those were two most common languages, but we also see that TFWs actually come from a variety of countries, and some other languages included Thai, Mandarin, Hindi, Ukrainian, Arabic, and others. For their country of birth, most of TFWs, they come from Philippines, Mexico, and India. Those were most popular countries. Another important point to mention is that around 72% TFWs are male and 28% are female. So that's an important thing to consider. As for their employers, we see that some of the biggest corporations are, for example, Tim Hortons, McDonald's, Cargill, and others. We did a broad analysis of the qualitative and quantitative data of the project. We found that Alberta had, out of almost 3,000 of the TFWs that were served, Alberta had the biggest number of TFWs, almost half, so 1,400. And Manitoba a bit more than the third of TFWs that were served by the project were living in Manitoba at the time, so 1,000. And for Saskatchewan had the lowest number, 450. Speaking a bit more on the top TFW client needs and concerns, important thing that we already mentioned, temporary status prevents their access to services. We heard that TFWs would walk into the organization, not speaking of the TFW Prairie project, but other organizations when they were just simply seeking support. And the first thing they're asked is your PR card. And since they don't have one, they would just need to leave. That makes them reluctant to access other services and support as well. One precarity usually leads to another one, meaning that if a TFW loses their work, they lose their income, they fall behind on rent, they're not likely to access healthcare services because they maybe don't have access to the health insurance anymore. So we see that problems are likely to add up very quickly. And yeah, lack of knowledge remains a permitting problem, which makes TFWs even more vulnerable. These two visuals demonstrate the top TFW client needs and concerns. We pulled them from the caseworker and referral case notes and created some sort of word clouds which demonstrate the importance of certain aspects of the TFW experience while here in Canada. You see that COVID is in big fonts, so that was something important that was mentioned multiple times. The same goes for food. So food is a big concern, food bank, other issues that come up pretty frequently were employment, immigration, English, airport, dose. So anything related to vaccination. Yeah, this just gives a good overview of what kind of issues TFWs face. And speaking about TFW outreach and employer engagement, among the most important challenges are, of course, lack of data, lack of location intelligence. While there is LMIA data, there are several flaws about it. It doesn't provide the most accurate picture of where the TFWs exactly are at the moment in order to give the opportunity to SPOs to serve them effectively. TFWs have low familiarity with actually what social services are. A lot of TFWs expect that they may need to pay for those services. They do not actually have the trust. And employers, they don't trust organizations as well. They are reluctant to cooperate because the TFW Prairie project is very novel in the areas, and both TFWs and employers, they don't know what it is. They are reluctant to access for that reason. Among some of the promising strategies as came out from the qualitative data is broadening the partnerships and getting involved in as many organizations as possible to disseminate the information on the TFW Prairie project, that this support is actually available and the TFWs can access it for free. And then as for employers, a very important point is reframing discussion to actually tell them that we want to hear your needs first, and at the same time being flexible in time and place. For especially was true in the rural areas where TFWs and employers, they worked in shifts. And social media engagement was also something new, but brought some results over time, and following up to reassess needs as well. And speaking more on the service delivery reach and gaps, as I mentioned already, the number of improved LMIAs is very vast compared to TFW Prairie region project clients served. So what we did as part of our data analysis, we actually identified those that we call service deserts, like those areas in the Prairie region that organizations, they could not reach like to that extent, but that there were a lot of TFW positions which simply remained unserved. And it's kind of striking. So you see central northern Saskatchewan, approved TFW position, more than 1,000, and just 200 project clients that were served. Central North Alberta, approved positions, 6,000, just a bit less than 500 project lines that were served. Southern Alberta, almost 5,000 approved positions and less than 1,000 project lines. That means that all those thousands of TFWs, for whatever reason, they didn't know about the project or they just couldn't find those resources online, they remained unserved. So definitely there is potential for much more clients that needed support. And now I'm going to hand it off to Doha to speak more on recommendations and how we are proposing that all of these challenges can be solved. Thank you.
Thank you, Ksenia. I do hope that these recommendations would be able to solve all these problems. We're only going to be hoping, but it's definitely a concerted effort at various levels. So as you saw here, the project outcomes, the TFW Prairie project outcomes, and then our analysis of literature and data really show systemic policy funding and capacity gaps that are in critical need of addressing to shore up the temporary foreign worker experience, support immigrant serving service provider organizations, and assist employers in the Prairie region. As we saw and we analyzed, TFW's needs are primarily integration oriented. It's about food security, housing, financial literacy and assistance, public health, information services that result from inadequate service supports on and outside the job. The project analysis and literature review also shows structural gaps in employer engagement, funding supports, and monitoring mechanisms that help employers ensure their workers are productive and healthy on the job. And then, as Ksenia was showing you, mapping data further paint a picture of opportunities for future expansion for immigrants serving SPOs, especially in rural areas where there continues to be TFW service deserts. And so these findings make a compelling argument for various recommendations. And what we did was we established some visuals that we were talking about. As you see here, an ideal temporary foreign worker serving ecosystem in the Prairie region. And you see at the heart of the system is the temporary foreign worker. The temporary foreign worker supported by a very strong provincial system that has monitoring, accountability system and advocacy system. It has dedicated services to newcomers and to migrant workers, and then also flanked by a very strong and supportive coalition building network that is at the municipal level, really helping temporary foreign workers and service provider organizations thrive in this ecosystem. I'll talk much more later. Next slide, Ksenia. What we also did is also map out an ideal temporary foreign worker journey in the Prairie region. And as you see here, there's various stages to it. It starts from pre-arrival. And the goal is to really have robust system pre-arrival information services. So when the temporary foreign worker arrives to Canada, they are well-informed, well-equipped, and prepared for their journey and for program participation. As you see during the program, the temporary foreign worker program, you not only have just employer-led on-the-job supports, you have on-the-job supports that are employer-led through a partnership with government and with service provider organizations and the community. You also see dedicated outside the job support. So the temporary foreign worker is being assisted in settlement, work, and integration. And then these supports and these services then help the temporary foreign worker post-program to make informed decisions about how to stay, what they need to do to stay, and then if they want to return, they have a clear idea of how they would be coming back again through various pathways. So our first recommendation really starts with the provincial governments in the Prairie region should consider strengthening, and in the case of Alberta, where none exists, promulgating provincial foreign worker specific legislation and policies to continue signaling the commitment to safe and productive work environment for foreign workers in the Prairie region. The Prairie region of course, given its economic regional status, should further align its foreign worker related policies to facilitate cross-provincial collaboration. That's very important, the sort of the alignment piece. Some considerations for legislative authorizations to consider would be authorizing and funding a standardized temporary foreign worker federal provincial monitoring advocacy system. I'll talk more about that in a bit. Strengthening oversight of immigration consultants by referencing the role of the College of Immigration and Citizenship Consultants. This is a new mandate for the official national regulator of immigration and citizenship consultants, and now has authority to identify and pursue unlicensed immigrant consultants. So this act came into effect recently in November 2020. Ensure equitable enforcement of TFW employment standards in rural areas, equally so as in urban centers. Strengthen workplace health and safety inspections, especially during the ongoing pandemic and moving forward, that effectively root out workplace violations, improve whistleblowers' protections against retaliation, and then instituting anonymity standards for TFW hotlines, providing an effective enforcement mechanism for the right of return airfare to reduce the number of TFWs who stay in Canada when their status expires, and authorize and fund a budget line item for temporary foreign worker or temporary resident integration services, which I'll talk more about in a bit. So moving on to the TFW monitoring advocacy system. We're recommending that the provincial governments in the Prairie region consider promulgating amendments to their federal provincial agreements to fund a proactive and effective federal provincial TFW monitoring advocacy system. This system, the role of the system would be dual. It would support employers, educating employers on TFW employment regulations, proactively monitoring and inspecting employers to stave off workplace violations. On the other end, it's dual. It's also providing supports for temporary foreign workers. So it's not only employer focused. It would advocate for temporary foreign workers by ensuring equitable access to worker protections, facilitate the reporting and resolution of on-the-job workplace complaints that increase trust with regulatory oversight bodies in the province. The TFW monitoring advocates, we envision them to be located in close proximity to agricultural, industrial, and business hubs that employ a large proportion of temporary foreign workers. It would rely on a highly customized and hybrid digital and in-person advocacy and monitoring outreach approach. So it's important to have some boots on the ground as well. Monitoring advocates would also create community linkages through partnership with service provider organizations that strengthen their advocacy and outreach role and extend their reach. Now, the Prairie provinces can leverage various aspects of their current workplace monitoring and inspection and worker advocacy framework towards establishing the system. Like one example, so the Alberta government can use or leverage its already existing network of TFW advisory offices, for instance, or the TFW hotline and special investigations unit to be able to establish this system. So it's not being, this recognition is not coming out of creating something that doesn't exist, but it's really leveraging what already exists for, in these provinces. And next slide. Through innovative funding strategies, including blending and braiding of federal and provincial government funding, the provincial governments in the Prairie region could consider filling gaps in federally funded settlement services by providing dedicated temporary resident integration services to temporary foreign workers through a funding stream or budget line item. These integrated services to TFWs would be delivered through a network of established service provider organization partnerships that proactively address TFW's basic outside the job settlement integration needs, relying on common service delivery standards. And so again, this is not necessarily creating something new. It's working off an existing network that already has its networks, already has its outreach, and it's just providing a dedicated funding stream to support temporary foreign workers specifically. Also, another recommendation on that slide is strengthening the pre-arrival and arrival orientation services. So our vision is the federal government and provincial governments have a role to play in building a centralized and robust system of pre-arrival and arrival orientation services for temporary foreign workers that enhance their journey in Canada and alleviate pressures on host employers and SPOs who are required to address those emerging needs that arise from, just as Ksenia was talking about, lack of awareness and knowledge of life in Canada. So the vision is that upon receipt of a work permit, a temporary foreign worker in their home country would be provided with comprehensive and continuously updated federal and provincial pre-arrival information delivered digitally and also by phone, and ideally in the person's first language. Specifically for SOP, temporary foreign workers, those agricultural workers, the federal and provincial government would further coordinate the provision of up-to-date pre-arrival information resources with the TFW's home country governments to ensure alignment on communication of latest program policies and requirements. Because we did hear that there would be misalignment in this information, and then you have these SOP TFWs showing up, not being informed or not having the latest information about the latest updates from the Canadian government, let's say on provincial public health measures. Our vision is arrival information services would see a coordinated service delivery approach between the federal government, CBSA, airport authorities, not only where TFWs initially land, like the international arriving flights, but also the domestic connecting flights at major and regional airports. So subsequently landing in the place where they will be settling. A coordinated approach with the host employers and also with the immigrant serving SPOs. And so in terms of arrival information services, they would reinforce what TFWs are hearing back home through the pre-arrival information services. But it would be contextualized through in-person interaction, through written collateral that the TFW can take back with them to their workplace or to their new home, and it would be provided in various languages. Next slide. Okay, here what we're recommending is immigrant serving SPOs supported by umbrella organizations through guidance, research, coordination, and outreach. They're encouraged to reimagine their service delivery approaches to temporary foreign workers through a partnership-powered model to expand their spheres of reach through the following program management components. One, data-driven. SPOs could pool their limited financial resources or seek a coordinated effort of umbrella organizations to help them to continue to tap into geographically mapping location intelligence that will help them really unlock insights about service reach, increase targeted location-specific outreach to untapped temporary foreign workers and employers. It would also help, being data-driven will help in understanding emerging needs and what are the demographic profiles of temporary foreign workers coming into their area. It would also facilitate program evaluation by embedding event-based surveys immediately following receipt of service, conducting qualitative exit interviews with a sample of clients to further understand how to improve services. Another way to reimagine service delivery is to be innovative. Some of those considerations are mobile units that go to rural areas instead of costly brick and mortar physical locations. Co-location of services, so thinking about how to co-locate services at established landmark sites in smaller communities. Digital engagement is really becoming huge and can be further leveraged as well by SPOs to better serve temporary foreign workers. Digitally interactive tools and resources on the website, link up to social media, marketing. These concepts really can be able then to get a hold of other government resources on pre-arrival and employer orientation through a website, an integrated website platform. Reimagined service delivery also needs to be employer and an industry engaged. So really to increase penetration into the business communities, SPOs would need to increase their capacity to play a workforce intermediary role, adopt a dual customer approach, not only just supporting TFWs, but also how to support TFW employing businesses and create a mutually beneficial environment for both customers. And you would do some of that to create this win-win partnerships by creating presence at industry associations, having that industry knowledge, speaking the language of the business, having a sectoral approach. So focusing on the industry and really honing in and helping out, employers and TFWs in it from a sectoral perspective. And then also really encouraging formal employer partnerships through memorandums of understanding or cooperation partnership agreements. Other strategies for reimagining service delivery is creating strategic government allyship approach with the government. And this would really help in bringing the government in the conversation and really helping SPOs increase their chance of getting access to temporary foreign workers when it might be difficult to get a hold of them, through the employer side. And then, of course, in the absence of dedicated funding, a stream to effectively serve temporary foreign workers needs, umbrella organizations and SPOs, they're encouraged to adopt coalition building approach and creating welcoming communities at the municipal rural government level, working closely with local champions. And some of that would be through co-locating or integrating services within existing program structures that have formal funding authority, a service referral system for temporary foreign workers for targeted and culturally relevant integration services, gathering space, virtual and physical, for temporary foreign workers and local communities to come together, and sponsored information campaigns and advocacy events. Following slide. We also have some visioning on the slide before that. We also have some visioning around what would be the role of umbrella organizations to really strengthen that temporary serving ecosystem. Umbrella organizations would provide system support by laying the foundation for building networks and outreach, augmenting service provider organization capacity, spearheading data exchange and research initiatives for data-driven project management. Some strategies are expand and diversify outreach, partnership, and membership. It's important to do that by engaging workforce intermediaries that have experience serving newcomers and engaging employers and industry partners. So expanding that reach to encompass them. Investing in a temporary foreign worker Prairie Region Data and Research Center that would, increase or enrich the TFW Prairie Region Knowledge Bank. Would be the hub for SPOs to come to get a hold of latest data. Recommending addressing research gaps. And in our report, we have specific areas to increase knowledge where there are research gaps on the recruitment process, for instance, shining light on champion sponsoring employers, not only on the bad employers, really research that engages temporary foreign workers in program reform initiatives, understanding the role of foreign embassies and consulates in this journey and in the ecosystem. Talking to more migrant seasonal farm workers, conducting more literature and research around that, and also understanding the undocumented temporary foreign worker journey to really inform, reform initiatives at the legislative and policy levels, at the federal and provincial levels. Convening a TFW serving ecosystem conference that would really kickstart wide-scale networking, collaboration, advocacy efforts. And then lastly, developing a program implementation toolkit that builds on the best practices and promising strategies from the TFW Prairie project partnership. And that would help in replicating. So it would expand replicability of this model at a wider level, and also include strategies to best engage employers and speak their language. Lastly, we recommend various additional reforms to various programs or components of programs touching on temporary foreign workers. They're very much advocacy related. They're based on what we heard from our engagements. They're also based on the literature that we reviewed. And some TFWP reforms would include considerations for a sector-specific work permit, open work permit for TFWs with non-compliant employers, and open work permits for TFW spouses and family members. Some literature recommends improving accessibility for EI benefits and other wage subsidies for temporary foreign workers when they're not working or they're sick. Ensuring temporary foreign workers have access to EI while waiting for the renewal of a work permit is also recommended. And then in terms of immigration pathways for temporary foreign workers, really advocating for reforms that would strengthen pathways to immigration for temporary foreign workers and creating more opportunities for permanent residency for temporary foreign workers working in agriculture and other occupations considered low skill. And this concludes our remarks, and we really love to open it now for Q&As.
Thank you so much, Doha. That was, and Ksenia, that was incredible. I do know there was a question in the chat, which maybe we should get to first, and then some live ones. So the, maybe it's actually overlap. Sorry, Lisa. The question is, how often do TFWs present with their family members, i.e. children on student visas? She's saying that this is common in their organization and that the children often have serious needs.
Mm-hmm. Ksenia, do you want to address that? Oh,
Yeah.
you're muted.
Yeah.
Okay, you're good.
Yes, so Lisa, just to make sure I understand, what do you mean how often did the TFWs present with their family members? You mean how often they would come to the SPO with their children?
So, yeah, just to give some context. So we deliver services in very small communities throughout Alberta. And what we have seen most frequently, especially this school year, is parents that have come to Canada as temporary foreign workers through a provincial program. And then federally, they're benefiting from a federal program that allows any child under the age of 18 to come into a Canadian public school on student visa. So we have parents who are TFWs, children who've come on student visa. As SPOs, we are essentially forbidden from providing services to them. We do, but we're not supposed to. And we end up in situations where the schools, for example, are seeing children who are on under 18 student visa presenting with autism, with serious learning disabilities, with food needs, with health needs. And essentially everyone's hands are tied in terms of providing service, because I don't think this is something that was intentionally planned for. I think it's kind of like I've noticed some of my staff are Tagalog speaking, and they've actually noticed advertisements on YouTube that go out specifically and say, would you like to work in Canada as a TFW? You can bring your child with you. You just need to fill out this extra piece of paperwork. So I wondered in the course of your research if you had encountered this, if you had identified any strategies, because I would say in our SPO work, it is a constant and quite a serious concern that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you so much for your question. So for this project, we analyzed the data that was provided to us, and it was very specific. So we did not, I don't think that was actually captured, whether the client would come in with their children. So I don't think I can answer that question. And to be honest, now that you're talking about it, it actually, like, after scanning all the literature, it seems to be a big gap. Actually, like, it's something to consider for the future, because I don't remember seeing anything on the chat of the children of TFWs in the literature as well. But you're right,
Yeah.
that's something to consider. You want to add anything?
Yeah. Sure, and to add, Lisa, definitely, I think one of the things that we saw from the literature and also from scanning the TFW Project Prairie, experience of the partners providing services, is that there's multiple needs, presenting at them. So the scope of the Prairie, the Prairie project was really about COVID, and realized that it's much more. And that's why this research was commissioned, because it's like, how do you take a unique partnership that has taken place across the Prairie region, and then you amplify it further, either by by giving it more funding, by giving it sort of a mandate, increasing its reach, but definitely increasing the mandate so it's doing more. But that's why we're thinking that a dedicated stream of funding for TFWs, and also advocacy around creating an opportunity for TFW family members to be getting that support as well, through some sort of status, just like international students are able to give a bit more status to their spouses, for instance, and family members coming in.
So the next question is from Annette. She says, what happens when the TFW no longer has status and is waiting on a decision? They are unable to access employment insurance. So my understanding is that when TFW no longer has status, so when their work permit with the particular employer expired and maybe they're waiting on a decision to have it extended, or as we said, to maybe get employed with another employer who has an LMIA, and stuff like that. So you're right, they're unable to access EI. And as we learned from the literature, many TFWs are actually ineligible to access EI while they're even still on the job, and they just lose it for whatever reason. So this is a very significant gap. And even though they pay the tax, right? They pay for the EI, they are unable to access it, or they also don't really know how. This is a very bureaucratic procedure, so they don't know how to fill out the documents. Do you want to add anything, Doha?
No, I think this is really good. Yeah. There's another question we have. In your research, did you get an estimate of how many TFWs were interested in returning home versus applying for permanent residency? No, because we did not directly talk to TFWs, but definitely the literature shows always interest in through our engagement with the project partnership, is there's always this interest in coming to Canada from a developing country. There is interest in staying, and always looking, at one point during their stay, even from the first time that they're arriving, they're looking at what are how can they increase their chances to be able to stay. But we don't have that data.
Yeah, we don't have the data, but if I were to assume, and the way that the program is being sold, is that they of course want to come to Canada and stay here as permanent residents. And I mean, definitely it would be most beneficial to them. We also heard that from the during the workshops that the SPO said, yeah, TFWs, they definitely would like to come and stay here.
And I want to add, these are really good questions, because this is just a reason and a justification for why there needs to be more literature being written, more research being funded, focused on the Prairie region. Because I remember Jocelyn saying one of the first things she said is that there is a gap in the knowledge bank for TFWs in the Prairie region. So these are very good questions. We tend to always get examples what's happening in Ontario or in BC at the federal level at a very high level, but not necessarily focusing on the Prairie region.
Definitely. I feel like we've touched upon a lot during our work, but that is actually just tip of the iceberg. The more literature we went through, the more problems we saw. The program definitely needs to be reformed in many ways. The next question is about human trafficking. Recently, there have been a lot of presentations on human trafficking, and the data showed TFW as the main victims for being the most vulnerable. Have we encountered victims of human trafficking in the research? So as Doha mentioned, we did not have the opportunity to talk to the TFWs. That was not within the scope of our project. But as I did the extensive literature review, I did see that in the literature that interviewed TFWs, the qualitative research, and that was actually very striking to me. Like I did not expect to see that, but definitely that there are cases. And I think during one of the workshops, some of the SPOs also mentioned that there were a couple cases. I'm thinking that we also may not simply know like how far this, like we just may not simply find out, like it might be there, but human trafficking is a very sensitive topic. And because of all of those issues, like fear of reprisals, TFWs may not, come to actually file a complaint. So yeah, that could also be a significant gap.
Mhm. Thank you, Ksenia. I see a question here that's, very interesting is what if a TFW is not necessarily coming from their home country? I mean, I think still there needs to be the same level of pre-arrival services and the same level of, coming equipped with the knowledge of how to hit the ground running, especially, after getting the work permit and knowing where they're going to be coming to which province. I think it's very important to have that provincial federal coordination on, on information services. So it's really helpful to get the provincial context. I'm going to stop here and ask Edwin. Edwin?
Yeah, the research showed some historical background in terms of some legislations federally and provincially, as well as literature from 2018 to the last year, and and also showing like the 1996 to the present, like some policy changes. So most of the non-status migrants that we are hearing with became non-status because of these changes. Like for example, mentioning the 4-in 4-out policy in 2011. And we're also hearing because of the negligence of their immigration consultants, such as no clear guidance, expectations about their applications and whatnot. So I'm curious to know, is this issues and gaps were observed during the research process?
Yes, Edwin, they were. I mean, and that's why, there was some literature and reports done on undocumented TFWs, and they're undocumented because of the confusion of these rules and not wanting to leave and not understanding why. So definitely, after those big reforms you're talking about, there was a huge spike in, in TFWs kind of overstaying and then really needing to have pathways. And then you saw that, as I mentioned, in 2020, some of the COVID reforms or changes at the federal level was some categories of undocumented TFWs had a pathway to kind of become documented, because there was the realization that there was a huge spike in undocumented TFWs. There was misalignment in understanding, of what the rules are and what the reality is on the ground. So yeah, definitely. And then we were saying that we need to do more research on that, and definitely engaging temporary foreign workers in policy reform initiatives. Don't just do policy reform because you heard SPOs talking about it. Engage TFWs so you could create a policy proposals that are realistic. So yeah, some of the ideas. Ksenia, I don't know if you want to add anything about that.
No, Doha, I think you covered that well. I would like to take the next question. It's about one of the recommendations for umbrella organizations is to invest in the TFW Prairie Region Data and Research Center. The question is whether there is a data and research center, whether it's already there or it's a recommendation to establish one. So as we mentioned, there isn't a center that consistently collects data on TFWs. And that is one of the biggest challenges that SPOs had. There is simply no data available. So that LMIA data, it is released with a bit of, it's not released, it's not very up to date. It's not released as soon as, the LMIA is approved. So what we're recommending is that it would be, of course, it would be much better if the ESDC, if they could actually share this information right away so that SPOs in the ideal world could just start working and assisting those TFWs that were approved right away. What we did as part of our work, we actually connected with 2 research networks. One of them was Rural Development Network and one more research network. And both of them said, you know what, there is no consolidated information. There is no data. There is almost nothing on TFWs. So we had to collect information by pieces from different websites, literature, and just try to figure out how all of this system works. So yeah, the problem is that there is no data available, and both ESDC, IRCC, they're sort of reluctant to share, which is a good question. Why? So there actually needs to be more advocacy efforts on making that information more available, at least to SPOs.
And I want to say this is the role of some umbrella organizations can play, but it gets me excited on the research side, but really creating linking data sets across different areas, and of course that there's a lot of confidentiality requirements around that, but how do you link it so you see a longitudinal picture of a TFW across? You have IRCC, ESCC, you have the CBSA, you have provincial data, you have the SPOs, the LMIA data. So how does it all come together to really then provide insights? The other thing on the research center is needs assessment. And I bet, SPOs do their needs assessments, but there's no alignment around that. So really kind of understanding what are those needs. Jessica?
Hi, thank you, Doha and Kisinya, for the presentations. It's really great. I just would like to touch base on the LMIA data that is available or not available for the SPOs. You mentioned earlier in the report that LMIA really does not capture the actual number of foreign workers, but it is a good start for us to really do our outreach. I would like to just really comment on the availability of data, specifically for the work permits, because for the work permits, which is probably more accurate, is available in the IRCC. We just have to request it for a fee. So that's what we would do when we do proposals. It's just that we have to have enough lead time to be able to request how many foreign workers are issued work permit in specific industries. For example, if it's in the agriculture sector, if it's seasonal, or so those information is readily available for public. We just have to request it for a fee, and the fee is very minimal. The LMIA is another story because I have not experienced requesting information or current information about the LMIA, but I did have a couple of experience requesting for the work permits, how many are issued for the SPOs, just to to add information.
And are there any issues around privacy? Like, are you able to get the address of the employer, like from the?
No. So what is normally available is that, for let's say, for example, to be more specific, that depends on what you will be needing specifically. Like, for example, for CCIS, I can only speak for what we need in CCIS. If we want to know the number of individuals issued in the post-grad work permit, we can get that. How many foreign workers are issued, say, in the caregiving program? How many foreign workers are issued in let's say, in the agriculture sector? So they would provide that information. The information that will be provided to you will depend on how much information you are specifically looking for. So I think the accuracy of that will really so much depend on how clear you want to have your requests addressed.
Sure. And Jessica, I wanted to say that question about whether this research unit exists or not, I mean, look at all the experience that you have about how to navigate the labyrinth of data requests, right, to inform decision making, project planning, and so on. And think about how integrating the folks like you and others coming together and really creating a system so other SBOs that don't have that capacity know what to do or can tap into a place they can get a hold of it, so they're not having to pay those fees and do those things. So this is the whole idea, is that it's there, right? Like the knowledge is there, the experience is there. It's really leveraging it in a new, like a facelift, or creating a space for it to exist and thrive, for sure.
Just having it more accessible, I think that's the most important thing too. Yeah.
Definitely, definitely. What else do we have here? Outside of this presentation, is there a report or another space we can learn from? Jocelyn, you know, our reports, are they going to be made available?
Yeah, they will be.
Okay,
So
yes.
we'll distribute it through our networks, and then we'll also post on the TFW Hub website and ACE's website as well.
That's great, thank you. And here there's a discussion of trauma really impacting as well. You know, TFW is becoming undocumented. Definitely, it's an ongoing challenge and a conversation.
Yeah, and family violence or any domestic tensions within families, they also, of course, influence the mental health of temporary foreign workers and also impacts their maybe reluctance to access any counseling services that were made available by some of the SPOs. We know that there is cultural stigma behind accessing psychological counseling. There is a range of issues there too.
And the other thing is one report that we read in our literature that we scanned is the relationship between that and housing. And so you have TFWs who, you know, feel that they, you know, if they are now on the sort of the employer abuse, you know, if they are being abused on the employer and they're living within the premises, that they don't have a safe haven to go to or a place to go to for housing that is a neutral space for them to thrive as workers.
Right.
Okay, who could we? Yeah, go ahead, Ksenia.
Stephanie is asking, what is the TFW Hub? So the TFW Hub is the website that was developed by the project and that encapsulates all the important information that TFWs could access as some sort of pre-arrival sources, which is also geared towards employers that they could read about what kind of supports are available for the TFWs. And I think it's just www.tfwhub.ca.
There's a question here about who could we contact directly to push ESDC and other authorities to reveal their process and data sets to advocate for TFWs better. I really think, I mean, it really starts with, you know, the group that exists at the Prairie level, that project partnership, the umbrella organization, bringing, you know, creating that conference or that conversation, bringing these partners and creating that government allyship conversation. That would then really be a place for kickstarting advocacy and discussions on data sharing agreements. Someone raised their hand.
Hi. No, it was, I have a, not a question though, but on the chat that was just missed. The issue of immigration consultant, I think is,
Yes.
the issue of the fees to immigration consultant, whether legal or not, or under the table, is I think a huge issue that is impacting the lives of temporary foreign workers, because if depends on how much you pay, and you know how temporary foreign workers, well, those who have only a specific or a specific employer on their employment permit, then of course that's the job that they have to do. But some of those who have open work permit, or those who have specific work permit, are sometimes forced to work, you know, in under the table as well, just to be able to pay for the fee. Someone mentioned those are coming from Taiwan. There are a lot of Filipinos coming from Taiwan who pay much more than anyone else we've seen. Those coming from India who go through a legitimate consultants, but there was one who had to drop $20,000 somewhere else in India. Their parents had to go somewhere else to drop it so that they would just be able to come. I know these are things happening outside, but it's a huge issue that needs to be discussed with government, especially when they're requiring only immigration consultants to do all the paperwork, right?
That is
Yeah.
so true, Ikaziana, that is so true. And I'm going to tell you more, just even beyond the scope of the TFWP program, just based on the research that I've done on immigration consultants. there are a lot of people who actually conduct unethical practices, and there isn't an effective mechanism to created by the government to regulate them. It's so easy to become an immigration consultant just after 1 year of college, and then
Correct.
because that ethnic trust between like the nationals of the same country, they trust them and they think that they pay all this amount of money to actually like stay in Canada. But yeah, like that's not true. There is so much more. Like this issue is so much deeper actually than just this program. You're right.
Mhm.
It's such a huge business that
Yeah.
it has to be looked at some point. And,
Sure,
and check.
Cassiana, I wanted to also say that, just recently in 2021, the college that oversees immigration consultants, was authorized by, legislation in Parliament to have more enforcement teeth and to play a regulatory process or enforcement role. So, first thing, I'm looking at Jocelyn here, I'm thinking like, we need to go talk to these people and get to get information from them, see what their budgets are like, to shed some light on what's going on and provide information back to the community about what their role is, what they're doing, what they don't do, what's in their purview, what's not. And, immigration consultants who are outside of the country and within and so on. I think there needs to be that education part, because they are a new body for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
thank
okay,
you.
what else do we have here? And some of the recommendations you mentioned, bridging the policy around funding. Is there a direction that looks better for the funds to be allocated? Dina, what do you mean by that? Is known as to SPOs to be able to provide wider services, or for existing service to be able to support the currently underserved population, TFWs.
That little note, does that clarify what I meant? So like you said, that there's policy change that's required, like some additional funds are needed to be allocated to certain portions. And so from my experience, some of the gaps, they exist because the programming is there, the services are there, but their TFWs are just not eligible based on the funding that those other service providers that are receiving. However, the other option is that, say, immigrant serving agencies would receive this additional funding and separately would provide those specific services to TFWs. And so in your review, does that make more sense?
Yes.
To add?
Yes. Yes, so you work off of existing structures. So again, I think some of what we were doing is we're not asking, like, it might sound like something new, but it's like, look, you already have the existing infrastructure. All you need to do is just add a budget line item that's dedicated to temporary foreign workers or temporary residents, and then just hand it to the SPOs that know what to do. I mean, SPOs might, some SPOs might need shoring up of their capacity a little bit to be able to play a dual customer approach on the employer side. But you know what? They know, they have it at their fingertips. They know sometimes where they would find TFWs even, and through those in their communities. So definitely. And I think, this is more at a high level. I think the next step would be like, let's look at the dollar, the dollar allotments, and then come up with an amount that then you would advocate for. Okay. Aylin?
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, my question is related to Ikashana, what have she said, because it's true that sometimes TFWs from other country, they are paying the recruiters, the immigration consultants, and then before departuring, they also pay. For example, if the client is from Taiwan, if they break the contract, they will pay as well in that country, just to before their employee will let them go. And I suggest that maybe is it possible that if they will have a rate for the, because I know it's outside Canada, the immigration consultants and recruiters, but do you consider having like a rate for them that, okay, this is the rate that we will going to pay for this immigration consultants, or because as you shown in your presentation, sometimes clients paying $10,000 to $25,000, right? And I think it's not reasonable because when they came here in Canada, sometimes the contract, it says when they sign the contract, they will pay $15. But sometimes the truth is they are underpaid, the clients as well. So, and then the struggle will start from there because, but they cannot complain because they are afraid that they will lose their job.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that is something that the College of Immigration Consultants, that as we mentioned, should approach, should address, like the rate, like a fixed rate, like not more than this amount for this specific application could be one of the solutions. I'm not sure if it's implemented yet, because as I said, like there needs to be actually more research on the transparency of that organization and how effective it is. And like that could be one of the solutions. But again, they only have the jurisdiction over those immigration consultants who are in Canada, but those who are outside the country, it's practically impossible to track them down because they live in other countries. So I'm guessing what the best that we could do is actually provide as much information as possible to TFWs and to make it as accessible as possible so that they know what their rights are, so that they know that there are people who can overcharge them, and so that they like protect their own rights based on that knowledge that is provided.
Mhm. I have here Jasmine asking questions about research, and so I get really excited about those questions. But do you have an idea of what next steps are from this research for researchers? Yes, when the report is shared, there's specifically areas that say where there are research gaps and what to do. I think primarily is really needing a needs assessment, an engagement led needs assessment of temporary foreign workers, but not only temporary foreign workers. You need to talk to the SBOs, you need to talk to government, like it needs to be various actors, and you're asking them what their needs are, and then that solution generation bubbling up and really kind of understanding what are the needs at the Prairie region level. Your question is, were there any data points you wish you captured from the primary collation on this project to help you understand the TFW context better? Yes, I like to engage with the people that I'm writing this about. So we were looking at literature and looking at data that was already collected from a project. We analyzed that. We engaged with the project partnership, but definitely if we were able to talk to temporary foreign workers directly or those clients, I mean, I think even our journey map would be more powerful. But we're as researchers, we're adept to kind of work with what we have, but definitely there's next steps, and these are where the research gaps are that gets us really excited about engagement.
Yeah, just to add to what Doha said, to Jasmine's question, so recruitment process is definitely a huge research gap, but also we're thinking about the role of foreign embassies and consulates, the role they play, that they were in our model, but we see that they're not that involved right now. They could be involved much more. And also maybe make a spotlight on employers, those like also what is their experience actually like, what do they think about this program, how do they think it could be made better. And also, as we already said, undocumented TFWs and migrant seasonal farm workers, just because they're so hard to reach, they're in these isolated rural areas, that would be very important to tap into for research purposes as well.
Mm-hmm. Renee?
Hi, thank you. I guess I just would like to press a little bit more on the importance, if possible, of including in your recommendations for the government to actually monitor or have some more control over the rates that are being charged, because it's good if you let the foreign worker know, this is $20,000 an outrageous amount of money and you should be paying less, but the consultant is not really going to mind so much, to use a positive word. They will just be, okay, you don't want to pay that much, we'll just go to the person who will. So having the government really paying attention to that, because a few years ago, I had a bit of a conversation with some policymakers in the International Experience Canada program and through the recognized organizations. And I was told that they are not monitoring those rates. Basically, they pretty much leave it to the agency.
Yeah.
But yeah, it seems like it would be important for, I'd never heard personally of 20,000. I've heard of 8,000 and 9,000, which I already thought was pretty outrageous. But yeah, it seems like the government somehow would be great if they could step up a little on that one.
Of course,
Thank you.
Yeah, we weren't focusing that much on the recruitment just because we know it's like a very kind of dark topic that has a lot of concerns, as you said. We were focusing more about what can be done like to provide the services for TFWs. But you're right, like recruitment remains a big issue, and there was something else I wanted to add, but yeah, like we could think of some recommendations for the College of Immigration Consultants. It's a very new organization, and they have lots of growth to be done, and more transparency is needed in the process.
And it has really to do with their professional regulatory body. So, what are those practice standards and codes of ethics that they're putting for these immigration consultants? And that's where you look at it, because that's their role, is to do that. And then in order for you to be practicing, you need to be a part of that college. And then, and then complaints come through and they process them. And sometimes it might be that they would be unlicensed to practice. So it's very interesting to look at that new role and to understand. I mean, it's important to play that role. I know like SBOs play they have so much on their plate, let alone to look at what a regulatory body is doing in terms of their codes of ethics and standards of practice for their professionals. But someone needs to do it. And it's definitely a research topic.
Yeah, I remember what I wanted to say. We actually found like during the policy analysis that there are significant differences over how the licensing of recruiters is approached in different provinces. Like there is no consistent mechanism, right? So that also kind of prevents that kind of accountability and transparency. For example, in Saskatchewan, it's like each person who works as a recruitment consultant, is an immigration consultant, needs to get a license, while in Manitoba, it's an organization that gets the license, right? So, and in Alberta, because it doesn't have a specific TFW legislature, there are two types of licenses, for national and for international workers, like who get recruited. So just the mechanism is so different and inconsistent. That's also something that we kept in mind.
I just want to add, sorry, Greg, quickly. I don't know if you've seen contracts of clients with immigration consultants. I've seen a few, and these contracts are like no escape from Alcatraz, is the way they're worded, that you cannot even get out of the contract without paying the full amount. It's even worse than a contract with a lawyer or any other contract where you are given a way out and you only pay for the services that were provided at that point. But contracts with immigration consultants, so far the ones that I've seen are ironclad. You cannot get out without paying the full amount. There have been clients who have gone out of the contract and they just stopped their credit cards, for the consultant to access them. But as the contract itself, I even questioned that with one of the consultants because of how it was worded, to the point that it's already, I think, illegal, immoral, to not allow a client to leave a contract and just pay for the services that has been done so far.
You're absolutely right, Ika. Yes, and there are so many loopholes also in the legislation that sometimes, if there is no specific prohibition on charging the recruitment fees, employers may still find like some sort of way to charge the TFW and to pay the recruiter. Like there are so many of those loopholes that
Sometimes they're double payment. And for Renee, the 20,000 was on top of the actual fee to the consultant. It was under the table money that, in exchange for the documents. And this happened in India. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just feel like just having this conversation, how important this topic is. And I feel that it's definitely to do more research on, but I feel like we needed to add it as an advocacy point or recommendation, really advocating for what Magno has here is a standard fee for immigration consultants, and that would be part of processing. It would be a transparent fee, but definitely something to rally around and work some more on of what would that make sense, like maybe scanning across provinces, doing a scan and then informing at the federal level, like what would that look like? Would there be provincial variations and so on and so forth? Would be really good. So of course, more research doesn't hurt. Any other questions? If a TFW in Manitoba is charged a fee, the employer must reimburse the worker as per RAPA.
Yeah, but the language is different, like in RAPA and Favrisa, Saskatchewan's legislation. So yeah, there are some differences around those prohibitions on recruitment fees. I think up until recently in Alberta, there was a loophole that they can charge for recruitment services, but they can't charge for the language services or for resume preparation services, which also gives like recruiters this kind of opportunity to charge a super large fee just for like interview preparation or something like that.
Correct. Any other questions? Okay, Jocelyn, I don't know if you want to take it from there.
Thank you so much, Doha and Ksenia, and for everyone for the questions. I think the vibrancy of this conversation is really underpinning the engagement with the project in general and the hunger, I think, to be able to provide better services for TFWs holistically. So I'm really looking forward to everyone using this information as fully as they're able to. Of course, we will also post the recording of this online and share the reports, and you're welcome to share it within your circle as well, because I do feel quite strongly that the more people who know some of these gaps, the more a unified voice might be able to find some solutions or advocate. And I appreciate that everyone made time in their day for this meeting. I know we went a little bit long, but I think it was well worth it. If you have any questions afterwards while you talk to your teams or think, please feel free to reach out. I'll put my contact information in the chat, and Ksenia and Doha may wish to too.
Sure.
And then we will get back to you with answers as possible. And for anyone who's at Metropolis, Doha will be there as well. So you might have an opportunity to ask her some questions in person if you're able to make it to Metropolis later this week. So
I know.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I want to say thank you, Jocelyn, for the opportunity that we will be also presenting our recommended actions at a workshop panel at the Metropolis conference this week.
Definitely. All right. If there's no other questions, I hope everyone has a good rest of their day, and hopefully we talk again soon. So thank you, everyone.
Bye.